Well, I would say any new technology always offers some potential new use or aesthetic or approach that can be really useful and appropriate to a range of different artists for a variety of different reasons. But I also think it's really important to remember that everything in kind of art processes are technologies. So, a pencil is a technology that affords certain ways of working. In terms of new technologies, to some degree, they stand on what's pre-existed and are built upon that, so they're not developed as such in complete isolation. We can see traces of previous technologies in how digital technologies operate. I also believe that they extend the possibilities of those previous technologies, and they bring certain qualities that perhaps don't exist in, let's say, mechanical, in that digital technologies have aesthetics and processes that network a lot further. So that's a word that is attributed to digital technologies, and how dissemination of work can be far more prolific and access a lot more audiences. To some degree, printmaking was a real driver of this idea of disseminating imagery and having a massive kind of democratizing process. More people could own the work because multiple copies existed. It was more affordable because it wasn't a singular image anymore. And I think digital technologies have allowed that to continue, but they've also allowed us to see the production of images or original sources in multiple different ways. So with digital technology, we can see how a piece of information can be rendered in multiple different formats and ways. So we can get digital information into sound, into an image, into an object, into projection. And this comes from a kind of digital source, which I think is really interesting and perhaps what separates it from mechanical printmaking, given that the matrix is often made for a particular process and exists within that. So I think this is a really interesting point in time to think how many versions or derivatives can come from a single source, that being a digital file, which we might refer to as a digital matrix in some capacity or other. Is quite important to think about. But I think with the advance of every technology, new vocations have happened because of it. So I'm not an advocate of saying that we need to automate everything. I think automation does have its potential qualities and usages. I think, if anything, it will push the idea of the potential of humans and their capabilities, because we are designing these technologies to some degree. There's often a kind of humorous antidote of the machine worker, the factory worker, being replaced by a piece of hardware, and they end up becoming the person that fixes the piece of hardware when it breaks down. So I always think that's a really interesting analogy to look at. But how does this, is this as an asset for art or art making? If it's appropriate to an idea or process, that the work must be made by a machine so that the idea resonates a lot more, because let's say the artist could have produced what the machine produces, but it may lose its significance in idea because it was produced by them rather than a machine. I've made some similar work along these lines, so the idea is integral to the way in which it's made. In the instance that I used it, I thought about the print-on-demand model, whereby we send digital files to a company that exists outside of the traditional print studio, so we don't have as much contact with production. This is then sent back to us, and we have the final image piece of work. But I found a model that exists with the print-on-demand idea, whereby rather than machines producing the work, humans were producing the work. There's a place in China, in Dafan, which is basically an artisan village where you send them your digital file, and rather than it being produced by a print, it's produced by craftsmen, painters, who then create the work on canvas and send a digital file back to you of the work to say, is this okay? Interestingly, what happens is once you approve it, they send the canvas, because it's painted canvas, of the digital file back to you. But through that recording process, you get an image of the bat, basically. Is this the correct image? And through this process, I thought, actually, there's a self-sustaining process here. So I sent them back the file of the bat, saying, can you now paint this again then, please? So they painted the picture that they took of the painting that they made for me. So they're holding it. And they then send me, is this okay? So they painted their fingers holding the actual work. I approve it, they photograph it. So then it's another iteration. This time they've stuck it to a wall and sent that file, so I send it back to them. And this is a process that keeps going and going to the point where I'm no longer making the work at all. I'm no longer photographing the work. My hand essentially, or this traditional idea of the artist's hand being in the work, has completely been moved. But what it is it's not the reproduction of a subject, it's the examination of a process that I'm interested in. So with all of these technologies, I'm interested in how they work rather than what they do specifically. And I think that's the position of the artist in this sense, rather than it being about the craft and production of something. I can also say that digital files are infinitely reproducible, that I can send it in an email to somebody. It can exist on an external hard drive, it can exist on my computer, so it has multiple areas in which it exists and which is the correct one, I suppose we could say. I think that in that sense there isn't really a correct one. There's just a means in which it is produced. In terms of ownership of the digital file, yes, that's important to have your own kind of copy of the thing. But in terms of rendering it physical, it's all of the parameters that are assigned to producing that thing, because the digital technologies, there are an infinite amount of output possibilities. And through the collaborative process, we pick particular ones that are suited to that particular artist. So as part of my research, I looked at how we archive this information. So if we need to reproduce a work again at a later point, let's say in a pragmatic situation, like if there was a fire and all the artwork was destroyed and the artist wanted to produce the work again, how would we do that? We would need that information to produce it in exactly the same way again. So I think it's important to have this data for that particular reason. In terms of who owns it, I would say it's a collaborative process through the studio that helps produce it, that helps the artist come up with all of these different parameters that are assigned to it. I also believe that it is the ownership of the artist as well, because they helped produce this thing, or their decision-making process helped the technical teams come up with the ideas of outputting it. Where it exists, again, is another interesting consideration. I'd say with most digital studios, as well as them being an archive of the hard copy work, I think to some degree they have a position whereby they should also record all of this other data that allows us to produce it. One potential scenario with this is technology updates every day, pretty much. We would say that the average sort of lifespan of a computer is around sort of 3 years, or that's how long they generally insure us for. And it normally goes right near the end, just before you really want it to. So there's that side of it. There's also Photoshop updates as well. They change all of their kind of color profiling. Printer software updates. So all of the ICC profiles, all of those things change. Now, to the knowing eye, we can see these variants between if we were to look at one that was produced with a certain grade of printer and then the next incarnation of that printer. Technical skill people would be able to tell you the difference. I'm not sure everybody would see the difference, but it is important to know how those things change. So I would say that in this purest sense, there is a shelf life to how long you can accurately reproduce this same image with the same software. I'm sure there could be a situation whereby these things can get future-proofed. So every time that there is a software upgrade, that the file is upgraded to match these upgrades, I can see this being a whole other area of archive. I'm not sure if I'd want to do it myself, because it sounds like quite a task. But there are also companies that are looking at chipping artwork or embedding information into the paper as well. So it can be traced to where the actual print was produced, so it contains that information as well. So people are starting to think about this a bit more. Personally, I don't see it as a massive issue. I guess it depends on what level of artist you are as well. And in terms of who's collecting work, ultimately it comes down to integrity. And if we are going to recreate work again, that it's done to the highest standards and uses all the documentation work that gets produced within a digital studio. Yes and no, depending on your particular position on this. There are kind of purist ideas that a work should retain the artist's hand or their signature or be physically touched by them in some form or other, and this has been something that's traditionally existed within the art world. Obviously we know that that's not the case for every artist. I'd also think that really it's an appropriate use of technologies. So it might be very useful that the work has to be conceived through digital technologies, and therefore it would lose its meaning if it was handcrafted. In terms of value, well, I guess that depends on how we're attributing value. Is it the value of the idea, or is it the monetary value, and therefore what an audience might perceive to be value in why they would purchase a piece of work. Again, sometimes the more traditional productions of work, such as paintings, sculptures and drawings, historically require a higher value than, let's say, digital works, just that there's a historical precedent for that. I think this may change. I'm not overly concerned about the monetary value of something. For me personally, it's really the integrity of the idea and why we choose particular processes that hopefully elucidate the meaning of a piece of work. So in that sense, I'm definitely thinking as an artist rather than a buyer. If I was to buy artwork, and again this is my own position, I'd be buying it not for the materials that it was made of or the duration of time in relationship to craftsmanship. That's not to say that I don't appreciate those things, I do, but I'd be buying more into an idea myself. To some degree, I'm only limited by what I read and see. I'm sure there are things going on that I have no idea about, or perhaps companies are still not ready to reveal what's happening. But in terms of interest that are coming out of those things, I've seen lots of interesting works that are using augmented reality. So this position between the digital world and the physical world, which I think are really interesting areas. What I like about it as well is there's a definite correlation between the physical thing that becomes animated through augmented reality. So it's not just purely about the digital experience, it's about the physical experience of that piece of work. And this is existing in lots of different formats, becoming interactive, which I think is really important as well, to engage more people in art. And given that artists are using these technologies for that purpose, that are owned by, lots of, I suppose more in a Western world, that own these sorts of technologies, it's a great way to get people that might not be interested in art, who have access to this technology or know how it works, to become more engaged with these things. In terms of really pushing the sort of edge of digital technology, well, we're seeing 3D printing, which has existed for a long time now, but it's when it gets in the hands of artists that's when it becomes very interesting. And one of these adages that I always kind of refer to is that artists want technology to do things that it wasn't necessarily designed to do. So then it's that combination between the technologists and the artists where I think really interesting work is happening. In terms of how we're really pushing these ideas technically but also conceptually, part of the project that I'm working on here with the students is to try and start to uncover is like a mindset of have digital technologies informed the way that we make or the way that we interact or the way that we see the world. And I'm willing to go out on a limb and say that I do believe this. But I've been born at a particular period of time, which I was born in an analog age and then stepped into the digital age. So my relationship with digital technology is very different, I would say, to somebody that may be 18 years old today, where they have more of an acceptance of digital technology that I do, or a different appreciation of physical or mechanical that I do. So I'm interested in finding out what those relationships are, and also how we can kind of make work that responds to the times that we live in, because I think most significant art is about that. It's about responding to the times that you live in, and I think it's equally valid to come from different age groups, so from the post-digital people, also to the ones that were born up into an analog era. To some degree, I kind of feel a little bit sorry for the next up-and-coming crop of artists, given the amount of choices that they have today and the amount of information that's available to them today. It's just mind-blowing. So what would we choose? Where would we start? I think that's quite a difficult position to be in itself. I guess I would reiterate established and I guess sensible and appropriate ways of making, that being that you should always be kind of true to what you're interested in, I think you should always, try and find a medium or process that best represents how you think. At an early age, I think it's really appropriate to subject yourself to a variety of different processes or ways of thinking, so then you can start to narrow down which ones seem to resonate with you, and then reflect on why this might be. I think more and more today as well, the artist has dual roles as opposed to just being the maker. You definitely have to be a publicist for yourself quite a lot, and while many of us might cringe at potentially talking about and projecting ourselves to people, I think it's very important to do that today. And we have things such as social media that help develop those characters of ourselves. And I think whilst it's really important to have a digital identity, I think it's also important to practice those humanistic skills of actually speaking to people in the real world as well. But whether we like it or not, people will be looking at us online. People will be making assumptions about the things that we like, the things that we tweet, the work that we put on Instagram. It does build a profile or a preconception of yourself before you're met by an individual or somebody that wants to give you a residency or a gallery looking at your work. And I've heard on a number of occasions that sometimes the two things don't meet up quite as well as we would think. So I think it's really interesting to think about how you represent yourself. That's not necessarily to say that people have bad expectations, but I think it's important, to reflect on, what it is that you're projecting, what it is that you're linking yourself to outside, what are the issues that you're talking about, and then, how these things may be present in the work. I think I do this myself in various different guises. I will look for somebody online if I've never met them before. I will try and find, a background story to them. I'm not saying that this didn't exist before digital technology, but let's just say the information is far more available now. So really important to start to think about those things, how we represent ourselves on this platform, and also how we record our work, how we present it, how it becomes, what does it say when it's a video as opposed to when it's a still work, or do we have monologues where we're now talking about our work in a video as opposed to a written narrative. All of these different types of information can give a richer understanding of somebody, so important to start engaging with them, I think.